June 4, 1942, Midway Atoll, North Pacific Ocean. The ocean was calm, but the world was about to change forever. For months, Japan's Navy had ruled the Pacific, undefeated, unchallenged, unstoppable. From Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea, their carriers had carved a path of destruction. But deep inside a cramped room at Pearl Harbor, a handful of American cryptanalysts led by Commander Joseph Rockefeller had done the impossible. They had cracked Japan's secret naval code, Jan 25. Their discovery revealed a chilling truth. The Japanese fleet was sailing straight for Midway. The U.S. Navy, still bleeding from Pearl Harbor, set a trap. Thousands of miles away, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto believed he was about to deliver the knockout blow to America. His fleet, 4 powerful carriers and more than 250 aircraft, prepared for what they thought would be another easy victory. But what neither side knew was that fate and intelligence had already sealed their destiny. When the sun rose over Midway, squadrons of F-4F Wildcats and SBD Dauntless dive bombers took to the skies, and the hunters became the hunted. Studio microphone. What followed would be a turning point in World War II. A battle written not just in blood, but in code. Backend index pointing right, stay till the end to discover how a handful of broken messages changed the Pacific forever. June 3, 1942, Midway Atoll, North Pacific Ocean. The Pacific stretched endlessly, a mirror of blue and silence. But beneath that calm surface, 2 nations prepared for annihilation. Inside a makeshift operations room on Oahu, the air smelled of sweat and coffee. Cryptanalyst Commander Joseph Rockefeller, in his rumpled bathrobe, stared at coded transmissions streaming in from Tokyo. The signals confirmed what he'd suspected for weeks. The Japanese target, codenamed AF, was indeed Midway. To prove it, his team had staged a clever ruse. Midway had sent an open radio message claiming a water shortage. Hours later, Japanese intercepts reported that AF is short on water. The trap was confirmed. Now, Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, made a daring decision. With barely 3 carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and a hastily repaired USS Yorktown, he would ambush the largest fleet Japan had ever assembled. Far across the Pacific, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto led a massive armada of over 200 ships, 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and 248 aircraft. His plan was flawless, or so he believed. He sought to lure the remaining American carriers into the open, crush them, and end the war before the U.S. industrial machine could recover. But Yamamoto's greatest weakness was his confidence. Japan's naval code, thought to be unbreakable, was already in American hands. Every movement, every order, every time a message left Tokyo, Rockefeller's men knew. As dusk settled on June 3rd, the quiet hum of PBY Catalina patrol planes began sweeping the endless sea west of Midway. They flew low and slow, their eyes scanning for the dark shapes of ships that would decide the fate of the Pacific. At 9:04 p.m., a Catalina spotted something. The shimmering silhouettes of Japanese transport vessels 700 miles from Midway. The pilot's report crackled across the Pacific command net. Enemy sighted. Bearing 320, distance 700 miles. Nimitz's gamble had paid off. The Japanese were coming exactly where he expected. On Midway itself, Marines dug trenches along the coral sands. Pilots checked their F-2A Buffaloes and SBD Dauntless, planes outdated but flown by men who refused to lose again. And out at sea, aboard USS Enterprise, Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance stood on the bridge, watching the horizon burn red from the setting sun. He said nothing, only tightened his grip on the railing. The next dawn would bring hellfire. June 4th, 1942, 0430 hours. North Pacific. The first light of dawn spread across the endless ocean like a quiet warning. On board the Japanese flagship Akagi, Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo stood on the carrier's flight deck as mechanics and deck crews prepared for launch. Beneath the rising sun banner, The air smelled of fuel, salt, and tension. At 0430, Nagumo gave the order. Begin the attack on Midway. The decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu erupted with life. 82 aircraft, A6 M0s, D3 Vals, and B5 Nkates, clawed into the morning sky, led by Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga. Their target, Midway Atoll. Sirens wailed across the tiny island. Air raid! Air raid! Many planes heading Midway. The defenders scrambled. Marine Fighter Squadron 221, flying obsolete F-2A Buffaloes and F-4F Wildcats, took to the air. As the Japanese formation appeared from the east, the sky over Midway exploded into chaos. Tomonaga's bombers dove, their payloads screaming down on a sand island and eastern island. Hangars burst into flames. Fuel tanks erupted, sending black smoke spiraling into the heavens. From below, Marine anti-aircraft batteries returned fire with desperation. The roar of .50 caliber machine guns mixed with the howl of sirens and the shriek of falling bombs. But the defenders paid a heavy price. Within minutes, half the American fighters were shot down. Lieutenant William C. Humbird, one of the few survivors, would later say, "We were flying antiques against the best pilots in the world." Still, the Japanese paid too. Several D-3A dive bombers were torn apart by flak as they pulled out of their dives, flaming wrecks crashing into the reef below. At 0655, Tomonaga radioed back to Nagumo. Midway's defense is still active. A second strike required. Nagumo faced an impossible choice. He could launch his reserve strike against Midway, or rearm his planes with anti-ship torpedoes in case American carriers were near. He chose to rearm. Below deck, hundreds of Japanese sailors worked furiously to swap bomb loads. Torpedoes for land bombs, bombs for torpedoes. Unaware they were creating floating bombs of their own. The hangars became tinderboxes of aviation fuel, explosives and munitions stacked side by side. Then, at 0740, came the report that changed everything. Enemy ships sighted, bearing 10 degrees. For the first time, Nagumo realized the Americans knew, and they were waiting. Far northeast, Admiral Spruance aboard USS Enterprise and Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher aboard USS Yorktown received the message. Enemy main body sighted. Attack immediately. Squadron scrambled. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, took off first. They knew they might not return. As engines roared and steel decks shuddered, pilots strapped in and crossed themselves. One gunner whispered, "For Pearl Harbor." The battle for the Pacific had begun in earnest, and by day's end, the sky would burn with oil and fire. June 4th, 1942, 0910 hours. Midway north of the Japanese fleet. The Pacific was calm, deceptively calm. Low above the waves, a line of TBF Avengers and TBD Devastators thundered toward the enemy fleet. Their mission was simple but suicidal: attack Japan's carriers head-on. In the lead plane of Torpedo Squadron 8, Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron adjusted his headset and spoke over the radio. "We'll go in. Even if we don't come back, someone will finish the job." They knew the odds. Obsolete, slow-moving aircraft carrying unreliable torpedoes against the most formidable air defense force in the world. But they went anyway. From the bridge of Akagi, lookouts spotted dark specks on the horizon. Enemy aircraft approaching low. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya, commanding the A6M0 Combat Air Patrol, launched immediately. Within moments, more than 30 Zeros streaked through the clouds like silver predators. The sky erupted. The Devastators came in low, barely 50 feet above the ocean, straight into hell. Torpedo Squadron 8, all 15 planes, pressed their attack. One by one, they fell, ripped apart by cannon fire, engines flaming, crews bailing into the sea. None scored a hit. In just minutes, every plane of Torpedo 8 was gone. Out of 30 men, only one survived. Ensign George Gay, who watched from the ocean as the Japanese fleet continued undisturbed. Moments later, Torpedo Squadron 6 from the USS Enterprise and Torpedo Squadron 3 from the USS Yorktown attacked next. They met the same fate. Zeros swooped down, cutting them to pieces. The sea became littered with burning wreckage and oil. But their sacrifice wasn't in vain. All those furious torpedo attacks dragged the Japanese Combat Air Patrol down to sea level. The Zeros that had once formed a deadly umbrella above the carriers were now scattered, low on fuel and ammunition. High above, unseen by the Japanese, 37 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from USS Enterprise and Yorktown searched desperately for the enemy fleet. They had missed their initial target coordinates and were low on fuel. Then, by pure luck or fate, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey spotted a single Japanese destroyer, Airasure, racing full speed north. He made the fateful decision. We'll follow her. She'll lead us straight to them. Minutes later, the ocean below exploded into life. 4 Japanese carriers, their decks crowded with fueled and armed aircraft, lay directly ahead. As the torpedo squadrons died below, the dauntless bombers appeared high above the clouds, diving out of the sun. The hunters had become the hunted. McCluskey's voice crackled over the radio. Attack! Dive bombers, follow me down! Engines screamed. Bomb bay doors opened, and the fate of the Pacific hung on the next 60 seconds. June 4th, 1942, 1,022 hours. Midway, North Pacific. The ocean glittered in silence, and then it began to burn. From nearly 20,000 feet, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey pushed his SBD Dauntless into a near-vertical dive. The altimeter spun like a clock running out of time. His target, the Japanese carrier Kaga. Wind screamed through the cockpit as McCluskey shouted into his mask. "Let's give it to him, boys." Below, the Japanese carriers were in chaos. The decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed for a second strike on Midway. Torpedoes, bombs, and aviation fuel lay exposed in the open, an arsenal waiting for a spark. At 10:24, McCluskey released his bomb. Seconds later, it struck amidships on Kaga's flight deck, followed by 2 more direct hits. Another dauntless group, led by Lieutenant Richard Best, sighted the Akagi, the flagship of Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo. She was the pride of the Imperial Navy, her deck crew working feverishly to rearm Tomonaga's returning planes. Best of threw flak and machine gun tracers. He lined up his sight, crosshairs steady. Bombs away. His 1,000-pound bomb pierced the flight deck, exploded near the aft elevator, and ignited the hangar below. Within seconds, Akagi was a furnace. Aviation fuel flowed like liquid fire across the deck. Planes detonated one after another. The shock wave tore men from their feet. The flagship that had once led Pearl Harbor's assault was now dying. To the east, Yorktown's dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie, struck Soryu. 3 direct hits ripped through her decks. Flames engulfed the ship within minutes. In less than 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were crippled and burning. The proud heart of the Japanese Navy was being consumed before their eyes. On board Hiryu, Admiral Taman Yamaguchi watched black columns of smoke rising over the horizon. He clenched his fists. The fate of the Empire depends on us now. He ordered immediate counterattacks. Hiryu launched 2 waves of B-5 N-Kate torpedo bombers, one against Yorktown, the other against the American carriers still undetected. Meanwhile, thousands of sailors fought for their lives aboard the burning ships. Men leapt overboard into flaming oil slicks. Others tried in vain to contain the inferno, dragging hoses across molten decks. Akagi's captain, Aoki Taijiro, reported to Nagumo, "We can no longer control the fire." Nagumo bowed silently and ordered abandoned ship. By 1100 hours, the sea was littered with debris, smoke, and burning men. The carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor were dying in the same ocean they once ruled. From a bridge, Admiral Raymond Spruance watched the distant plumes of smoke rise. He turned to his staff and said quietly, "Gentlemen, This is our moment. But the battle was far from over. Hiryu, still afloat, was preparing to strike back, and soon, American sailors would learn that victory always came at a cost. June 4th, 1942, 1,330 hours. North Pacific. Smoke blanketed the horizon like a funeral shroud. The Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu burned fiercely astern, three blazing pyres marking the death of Japan's carrier supremacy. But far to the north, one ship still lived, the carrier Hiryu. Aboard her steel decks, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stood calm amid chaos. He was a warrior of the old code, refusing to spare. "We will strike back," he said quietly, "for the Emperor and for our fallen comrades." Within minutes, Hiryu's flight crews worked feverishly to ready her planes. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi led the first wave, 18 B-5 and Kate torpedo bombers, escorted by 6 A-6M0 fighters. Their target, the enemy carrier that had dared to challenge Japan's pride. On the flight deck of the USS Yorktown, crewmen cheered as word spread that 3 Japanese carriers were gone. The mood was electric until the radar operator suddenly shouted, "Incoming raid, bearing 320, range 30 miles. The alarm sounded. "General quarters. All hands, man your battle stations." The skies soon filled with black flak bursts as the Japanese torpedo planes approached in perfect formation. Yorktown's F-4F Wildcats scrambled, diving headlong into the swarm of enemy aircraft. But there were too many. 2 torpedoes slammed into Yorktown's port side. The deck lurched violently. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Below deck, compartments flooded instantly. Engineers fought to contain the rising water as the ship began to list. Yet Yorktown refused to die. Damage control crews worked like mad, counter-flooding to stabilize her. By 14:30, against all odds, the great carrier was level again, her engines still humming. Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the order to resume operations. "Get those fires out. We're not done yet." High above the ocean, Lieutenant Takashige Igusa led Hiryu's second wave, 10D-3 Naval dive bombers escorted by Zeros. They found the wounded Yorktown still afloat. The Val screamed down through flak and tracer fire. 2 bombs hit the carrier amidships, tearing open the flight deck and igniting fresh fires. But far to the north, one ship still lived, the carrier Hiryu. Aboard her steel decks, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stood calm amid chaos. He was a warrior of the old code, refusing to spare. "We will strike back," he said quietly, "for the Emperor and for our fallen comrades." Within minutes, Hiryu's flight crews worked feverishly to ready her planes. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi led the first wave, 18 B-5 and Kate torpedo bombers, escorted by 6 A-6M0 fighters. Their target, the enemy carrier that had dared to challenge Japan's pride. On the flight deck of the USS Yorktown, crewmen cheered as word spread that 3 Japanese carriers were gone. The mood was electric until the radar operator suddenly shouted, "Incoming raid, bearing 320, range 30 miles. The alarm sounded. "General quarters. All hands, man your battle stations." The skies soon filled with black flak bursts as the Japanese torpedo planes approached in perfect formation. Yorktown's F-4F Wildcats scrambled, diving headlong into the swarm of enemy aircraft. But there were too many. 2 torpedoes slammed into Yorktown's port side. The deck lurched violently. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Below deck, compartments flooded instantly. Engineers fought to contain the rising water as the ship began to list. Yet Yorktown refused to die. Damage control crews worked like mad, counter-flooding to stabilize her. By 14:30, against all odds, the great carrier was level again, her engines still humming. Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the order to resume operations. "Get those fires out. We're not done yet." High above the ocean, Lieutenant Takashige Igusa led Hiryu's second wave, 10D-3 Naval dive bombers escorted by Zeros. They found the wounded Yorktown still afloat. The valves screamed down through flak and tracer fire. 2 bombs hit the carrier amidships, tearing open the flight deck and igniting fresh fires. Yorktown's crew fought valiantly, but the damage was too great. Power failed. Communications went dark. Captain Buckmaster reluctantly gave the order. Abandon ship. As sailors climbed down ropes into the oily sea, Yorktown's flag still flew proudly in the smoke. From above, Igus's pilots radioed triumphantly. Enemy carrier burning. Target destroyed. But their victory was short-lived. Even as Hiryu's planes returned, Enterprise and Hornet launched their own counterstrike, 24 dauntless dive bombers, guided by the same pilots who had destroyed the morning's fleet. Their leader, Lieutenant Earl Gallagher, found Hiryu's group still turning into the wind, unaware of the danger above. At 17:03, the Dauntless dived. Bombs fell like thunderbolts. One struck near the aft elevator, another near the bridge. Explosions tore through Hiryu's hangars, igniting aviation, fuel, and munitions. Within moments, she was engulfed in flame. On the bridge, Admiral Yamaguchi refused to leave. Smoke and heat consumed the command deck. His officers begged him to abandon ship. He shook his head. "I will stay with Hiryu. Tell the Emperor we fought with all our strength." As night fell, Hiryu burned from bow to stern, the last of Japan's 4 proud carriers slipping beneath the Pacific waves. By midnight, only silence remained, and the shattered remnants of the once invincible Kido Butai drifted alone under the stars. June 5, 1942, the Pacific north of Midway. The battle was over, but the ocean still burned. All night long, the horizon glowed red where the Japanese carriers had died. The smell of oil and scorched metal drifted across the waves. Aboard the USS Enterprise, exhausted pilots slumped against bulkheads, faces streaked with salt and sweat. They had won a miracle, but few felt like celebrating. The sea below was littered with the wreckage of their friends, the men of Torpedo 8, who had charged into hell so that others could live to strike. Without them, one pilot said quietly, none of us would be here. Far to the west, the remnants of Admiral Yamamoto's fleet fled through rough seas. 4 of Japan's finest carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, lay at the bottom of the Pacific. Over 3,000 sailors were gone. In the dim glow of his flagship Yamato, Yamamoto stood silent before a map of the Pacific. For the first time, his eyes betrayed defeat. "The gods have turned their faces from us," he murmured. Messages from the lost ships came crackling through the radio. Desperate final transmissions, burning carriers reporting uncontrollable fires before silence swallowed them forever. In one of his last signals, Admiral Taman Yamaguchi sent a single word before going down with Hiryu. Banzai. He died as he lived, a warrior of an empire that was beginning to fade. On Midway, the air was still thick with smoke. Marines picked through twisted wreckage, burying their dead in the coral sand. A bulldozer scraped shallow graves near the shattered runways. The Japanese invasion force, once so confident, turned for home. The U.S. flag fluttered above the battered airfield, a small symbol of survival and of something far greater. In Tokyo, the news was unthinkable. 4 fleet carriers lost, the same carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor, gone in a single day. Japan's illusion of invincibility shattered overnight. Factories worked around the clock to replace planes and pilots, but they could never replace the veterans who had died at Midway. It was the beginning of the end, a slow unraveling that would stretch for 3 more years, but never reverse course. In America, the headlines read, U.S. Navy victorious at Midway. But behind the triumph lay quiet grief. Mothers received telegrams. Empty chairs waited at dinner tables. Historians would later call Midway the turning point of the Pacific War. It wasn't luck, it was courage, code-breaking, and sacrifice. A handful of cryptanalysts, pilots, and sailors changed the course of history with nothing but intuition, steel, and faith in one another. The Japanese had set the perfect trap, but America had read the code and rewritten destiny. Back in Index Pointing Right, if this story moved you, Honor their memory, learn their names, tell their stories, and remember that freedom is never free. Because the waves over Midway still whisper their sacrifice.